On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, scaling the industry-government connection at the Naval Research Lab, and Congress's problem with protests gets a closer look. Welcome to Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. The Naval Research Laboratory is prototyping a hydrogen small unit power system in a collaboration with the Marine Corps' Expeditionary Energy Office and industry partners. It's the latest example of NRL's work to scale innovation for the sea services. Captain Randy Cruz, U.S. Navy, is the commander of NRL. Captain Cruz, welcome. It's great to have you on the program. What's the mission of the Naval Research Laboratory?
Well, first of all, Francis, thanks for having me. The mission of the Naval Research Laboratory is to conduct a broadly based, multidisciplinary program of scientific research and advanced technology development directed towards maritime applications of new and improved technology, equipment, materials, of systems, ocean and atmospheric and science and space-related technologies. We're looking for that game-changing technology that the rest of the government will want to take and put out into the fleet.
Not just the sea services, the rest of the government.
Mostly the sea services.
Yes.
We're focusing on that maritime application, both Navy and Marine Corps.
Fair enough.
Those are our primary customers.
How do you assess what's innovative and sufficient to pass along to the rest of this, what that might be interesting to the sea services and the rest of the government?
Well, so what's fantastic about the laboratory, if you allow me a couple seconds here.
Yes.
So the laboratory is about 4,000 people, about 1,300 contractors, 2,700 government civilian employees. Of that 2,700, about 1,800 of them are science and engineering professionals. Of that 1,800, 900 of them have PhDs. More than half of the Navy's PhDs are at the laboratory. And it's those folks, not just the PhDs, our masters, our undergrads, it's how they attack the problems. We like this bottoms-up approach. We often reference this quote from Henry Ford, who in his day would have asked, hey, what do you need? And he probably would have said, a faster horse. Mm-hmm. Well, we like to look at the problem. Don't tell me the solution. Give me the problem, give me the parameters, and we'll see what we can come up with. Maybe we'll come up with this container with wheels and propulsion. Maybe not a faster horse, more horses, perhaps an automobile. Give us the problem, and we'll come up with the solutions. And so it is a world of trial and error. Mm-hmm. You know, some of the things they come up with may not hit the mark, but a lot of them do. And over the course of the 100 years that the lab has been in existence, we've got countless examples, everything from seabed to space. You
were talking in the green room that NRL got in on the remote control autonomous game in the 1920s. So I imagine a lot of the technologies that you look at, you see some root in some work that's happened at the lab.
That's correct. We've got quite a few things that are on the shelf. And I have to tell you, the researchers at the laboratory are some of the most humble, professional, patriotic scientists you'll ever find. They're not real good at marketing the stuff they're working on. And so it wasn't until I came to the laboratory and I was doing some research and I realized that the first remotely piloted controlled aircraft was in the late 20s at the Naval Research Laboratory. So here we are 100 years later talking about the impact of UASs and uncrewed vessels. Well, we've been doing that for quite some time. And it's our challenge. That's one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years at being at the lab. Having taken over the lab a few months ago, one of the biggest challenges we have is letting people realize what the laboratory offers, what's on our shelves, and in fact, a lot of things that are in existence today probably should have an NRL inside sticker on that thing.
I mentioned scaling innovation at the beginning of our conversation, Captain. How do you do that, especially in collaboration with industry?
So we host what we call innovation days, different than industry days. Typical industry days, you'll open up the doors and you'll have folks come and see what's going on. Our portfolio is so vast that we are picking particular topics. We'll post it on the SAMS.gov site to announce it. And I'll take you to a link so you can register. We've got one coming this fall. We're still trying to figure out what the topics will be. This last one we held in May was about battery power, storage, and tropical cyclone prediction software and those kinds of things. So for all you out there, pay attention. check SAMS.gov. There's an Innovation Day at the laboratory coming to you soon.
What do you hope to learn from Innovation Days that's different than an industry day? Is it just that the dialogue is industry to you rather than you to industry, or is there more to it than that?
It's more focused. It really takes a look at some of the patents and licenses that we have that are available and specifically showcasing them on a particular topic. If you look today at our website, we've got over 1,100 available licenses and patents industry partners can start using and scaling and taking for action. But they don't know they're out there. And just to say, take a look might be kind of an overwhelming task. But if you take a particular topic, let's say it's like this in May, we're talking about battery storage. If you're in the business of battery storage and batteryization, this is for you. So the topics will come out, it'll be more focused to get businesses to want to enter business with the government and to scale. Take things that are from the lower TRL levels and move them across the spectrum there.
Is the relationship, is a good relationship, a good partnership with industry at NRL similar to what a good partnership is across the rest of the department, or is it different due to the nature of the research to industry relationship?
I think because it's early research, there are some nuances to that behavior, but in general I think it's the same. We are interested in having business partners move these things, especially if it's useful, right? Of course, a company is not going to want to invest in something if it's not going to go anywhere. They just need to know what it is and what's out there. And so that's our half of the bargain. Here's what's available. Over to you if this is something you want to take and move on. But I think it's a healthy relationship. Can it be better? Absolutely. The more the merrier. I mentioned a rising tide will lift all boats. That includes not just the services, but our business and our academic partners as well. And in fact, the laboratory does a lot of work with the other services as well. So we're all connected in this ecosystem. In fact, every 6 months, we have a laboratory commander sync. In fact, this coming end of this month, I'll be heading to Middle River up in Maryland, part of the Army Research Lab's Robotics Research Collaborative Center to talk about congested logistics. And you'll have the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and even the Coast Guard throwing in their science and technology proposals and see what we can move on, what we can collaborate on. We definitely don't want to duplicate each other's work.
You kind of anticipated where I wanted to go next is what's the level of integration among the service research organizations to make sure that you're maybe looking at the same things but then collaborating if doing so rather than going off in different directions on the same thing?
Yeah, so if you look at both the people, the technology and the equipment, you'll see that across the DoD there are similar things, if you will. We do a lot of work with the Air Force Research Lab when it comes to hypersonics. They've got a wind tunnel, we've got a wind tunnel. Our wind tunnel is a little bit different in that we can run hypersonic speeds for up to a minute, so we can see some of the transition and the changes that are happening. And the other agencies, they don't have that. They've got a little more specific window of speed and time that they're looking at. So we bring different things to the game, but we're both very interested in hypersonics. So we'll take our teams and we'll collaborate using each other's equipment, using each other's expertise to move the hypersonics technology down the road.
We talked a little bit about UAS earlier in the program. What are some of the other technologies that are really a big priority for you and for your colleagues in the sea services now?
Oh boy. So the laboratory does everything from seabed to space. So I'll just start at the bottom and move my way up. The idea of looking for mines, embedded mines, underwater with uncrewed vessels. We've got some programs, Knifefish, Skyfish, looking at side synthetic aperture radars, looking for that those types of threats. And then the ability to work through the water, which is an entirely different medium. So we have a couple divisions looking at acoustics and how sound moves through the water. And then we've got another division looking at the bathymetry and the conditions of the water, which dictate that. So living underwater, and then operating underwater, looking for threats, hiding ourselves, and then operating. If you move above the water, then we're looking at our fleets. Fleet of ships that are often suffering from corrosion, which can be a debilitating challenge. We've got folks working on how to better use different layers of paint, better treatments to help make sure that the ships are able to deploy more have more availability. Weapons, we quickly enter the classified world, so I won't touch that, but there's a lot of weaponry work there. But then as you go into aviation, into the air, longer enduring aircraft, smarter aircraft, and then even on the shore, you mentioned earlier about the hydrogen power supply, working with the Marine Corps, trying to bring long endurance power that is hard to detect. So it's both thermally and audibly hard to find, but brings lots of power. And then even into space. Before coming to the Naval Research Lab, I was the Assistant Chief of Naval Research at ONR, and before that, spent 3 years at NASA. As the Senior Advisor to the head of NASA, I had no idea that the Naval Research Laboratory existed. As a lifetime operator, using all this technology, not knowing where it came from, wasn't until my time at NASA and then to the Office of Naval Research where I figured out all the amazing things that comes from the lab. In fact, the laboratory has been steeped in space long before NASA even stood up. NASA stood up in 1958. The Naval Research Lab, in fact, gave the first 100 scientists at Goddard Space came from the lab. The longest in-orbit satellite, the Vanguard, is actually launched from the Naval Research Laboratory. A lot of space work. And then in the cyber world, and computers, we've got folks working on that as well. Huge portfolio. I kind of got lost in the question, but we're doing all kinds of stuff from the seabed to space.
We have about a minute left, Captain. How does your past experience inform the way that you want to lead the lab, and especially the fact that you didn't know that much about it as you became aware of it?
So the laboratory is already naturally broken into three segments that I like to focus on. One is our purpose, our mission, our service, if you will. We do things that will impact the fleet. This technology and the experiments to prove it out will eventually make it to the fleet, and they do that day in, day out. Number two is our strength, is our expertise. With all these PhDs and all these smart folks and their networks, they're good at what they do. Numerous Nobel Prize winners, IEEE fellows, AIAA. If they don't know, they will know who will. And then lastly, if you ever make it to the lab and you see how these folks work, this teamwork concept, and how if you're in business with one division, let's say you're working with the acoustics division, you're also working with the materials division. You're working with the entire lab. The way we work together and get along together is fantastic. Our service, our strength, and our teamwork makes the laboratory fantastic.
I'd love to come back and see the lab again sometime. Captain, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
Love to have you.
You can read more about NRL on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, Congress's problem with protests gets a closer look. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. We'll be back in just a moment.
Innovation doesn't wait, and neither do we. At Maximus, we solve problems, streamlining operations, delivering solutions at speed and scale that drive measurable results. From strategy to execution, we simplify complexity, building trust through expertise and innovative technology. Every service, every time. Efficient government delivered. We don't follow innovation, we drive it. Maximus.
Welcome back. More than half of contract protesters at the Government Accountability Office get some kind of remedy. Fewer companies, though, are making protests in the first place. Kenneth Patton's Managing Associate General Counsel at GAO. Ken, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. What kind of data do you have on the reason for this downward trend that I see in your work about contract protests?
Francis, first, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I really enjoy talking about bid protests. So let me give an answer to your question. Unfortunately, we really don't have data about why companies decide not to protest. You know, you're getting into the business decisions about companies, but we do have some theories about why companies decide not to protest. First and foremost, the Department of Defense has been granted what we call enhanced debriefing processes. That allows the department to give more information to losing companies, to explain to them what they did well, what they didn't do so well, and it gives them some opportunities to ask questions about the entire process. It's our thought that that process gives them some time to reflect upon whether or not they actually have grounds to protest. And as a result of that, with more information, companies have decided not to protest. You know, they get the information that they need, because in some instances, we find that companies are protesting just to find out what happened. And once they're getting this, they don't feel a need to protest.
You mentioned DOD has that capability. I imagine the fact that you noted that means that civilian agencies have either a different capability or requirement, or don't have that capability or requirement at all?
They don't have that requirement. Some agencies have taken it upon themselves to actually create some type of enhanced debriefing process, but the Department of Defense actually has a specific requirement to provide it.
You talked about this issue and other issues around contract protests recently at a hearing of the House Oversight Government Reform Subcommittee. What was the main message that you wanted to convey to them about what's going on in contract protests now?
Well, one of the things that Congress really asked us was whether or not it's possible to enact what's called a loser pay provision. And let me explain what that means. The government awards its contracts competitively, and so that means you have a winner and you have a loser. When you lose, there's a question as to whether or not your allegations had any merit. And so Congress has been concerned that some companies are gaming the system. And in this context, what they're doing is filing protests in order to prolong their opportunity to keep performing. So what they asked us to do was to take a look to see whether or not it was possible to make any contractor that files a protest and whose protest is denied or who loses to pay the cost to the government and the awarded contractor their costs, to see whether or not they could make a process to make that work. And so we looked at that message, and the three things that we wanted Congress to take away from the testimony was, one, protest trends are going down. They're not only going down across government, but they're going down at DoD. Across government over the last 10 years, we've seen a 32% decline in the number of protests filed. And at DoD, we've seen a 48% decline in the number of protests filed. So we wanted Congress to have that information. We also wanted Congress to understand that one of the possible reasons why we've seen this decline in protests is because the Department of Defense has what's called this enhanced debriefing process, where they provide additional information to the contractors. And so with the contractors having this additional information, they're deciding not to protest. And the third thing that we wanted to get across was, while it's true that we don't have specific data about why companies have decided not to protest as much, one of the things that we've done at the Government Accountability Office was to create an electronic protest docketing system and to charge a filing fee for that. Prior to 2018, you could file a protest to GAO just by sending an email, and it was free. After 2018, when we stood up this docketing system, we charged a filing fee, and there were some protesters that decided, you know, I just don't have an axe to grind anymore, and I'm not going to file a protest.
Interesting way to kind of gate that approach to the Government Accountability Office. As you have these discussions with Congress, what's the role of an organization like GAO to give them information about what's going, not just what's going on with numbers, but what kind of lives behind that? Because this is not the first time that I've heard about allegations like companies are using the system to just kind of stretch out their performance opportunities when they're an incumbent and don't win.
No, you're absolutely right. Actually, Congress enacted a provision in 2018 to require the Department of Defense to enact a pilot program to see if they could make that work. At some point, Congress repealed it because the department didn't collect the data to actually perform the pilot. So this issue, this question about loser pay has been around for a long time. So what's GAO's role in this context? Well, first and foremost, we're the referees. So we provide an independent, objective review of whether or not the government has adhered to the rules and requirements that Congress has enacted by statute and the Federal Acquisition Regulation. And so we try to give Congress an objective and fair and balanced review of what's going on behind the scenes with regard to bid protests and government contracts. But we're only a very small portion of the entire procurement process. And that was one additional point we wanted Congress to understand about the procurement process, because one of the results of a bid protest is obviously GAO could find that the contractor's arguments have merit. And in that context, what we will do is call sustain the protest. We find it has merit, we've sustained it, and we will make recommendations to the agency to take corrective action to fix it. Well, there have been some concerns about how long corrective action is taking. There have been concerns that corrective action is delaying the ability of agencies to deliver capability to their users and to the American people. But unfortunately, there's no data to support what agencies are doing in corrective action, how long it's taking, what things are they doing in corrective action. And so that was an additional message that we wanted to pass along to Congress in hopes that they will think about whether or not and what things they can do to get the data that they might need to target the resolution to any perceived problems they may have.
I mentioned remedy at the beginning of this conversation, and I read from your work, protesters achieve some form of relief in approximately 50% of cases filed with our office. Now, I took away from your testimony that relief can come in three main buckets. One is that you decide that they have standing and that they should have actually gotten the contract. Another one is that that the agency should at least do it again. And then there are some cases where the agency decides on its own when a company protests, we should just throw this out and start over again and not have to put up with that whole process. Are those the three main buckets of relief, or is there one that I might have missed?
So I like the way you categorize that. The bucket that we put all of these in is called the effectiveness rate. So how effective is GAO as a forum? And the first item that goes in that bucket is when we sustain a protest. We find that the contractor's arguments have merit. The second bucket, when agencies aren't stupid. When they look at a protest allegation and they say, this has some merit, they decide, well, there's no sense in waiting for a GAO decision. Let's take this back and fix it. That's called voluntary agency corrective action. And that by far is the largest portion of how a protest is resolved at GAO. And so when you combine those two elements, the sustain and agency corrective action, that's what we throw in that larger bucket of effectiveness. That's our effectiveness rate. And by that measure, about 50% of the protests that come to GAO receive that form of relief.
Well, we talked about the hearing at which you testified, and the focus of that was reform, as you mentioned. Do you have recommendations to make to Congress or to make to the agencies about how to reform the protest process?
Actually, we don't. Not in that context. Because our message is this. There may be instances where you need to reform the process, but before you reform the process, get the data you need to find out where you can target your fix. If you've got a procurement that's lasting 5 years, well, within that procurement, there's development of requirements, there's solicitation, there's evaluation, there may be a bid protest, but at GAO, a bid protest is only going to last 100 days. So out of that 4 years, do you really want to target your resolution at something that's a minuscule portion of the entire length of the procurement? The agency may decide to take corrective action, and that may last a year, 2 years. Part of that corrective action could include something that transpired at GAO. It could include something that the agency found on its own and it hasn't disclosed. Do you want your targeted approach to target all of that or just some small portion of it? So I think our message to the Congress is there may be problems. We don't want to say that there aren't, but in order to get at the root cause of those problems, you need the data to give you insight into what's actually transpiring.
Final thought, do the agencies have the data and they're not collecting it and curating it in a way that's usable, or are they not collecting the data that would help them make those decisions the way that you just described?
They're not collecting it. And in their defense, protests comprise a very, very small portion of their overall number of procurements. And the Department of Defense, I think we found over the last 5 years, the department had over 143,000 procurements. GAO only represented less than 1.5%. So it's a very, very small percentage of their overall procurements. And so from their perspective, the bang isn't worth the buck. Mm-hmm. They're not collecting it because they don't see a benefit in doing so. Mm-hmm. And that, again, goes back to whether or not Congress thinks it's important for agencies to collect it. And if that's the case, they can require agencies to collect that data so that Congress can analyze where the problems might lie.
Ken, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You can read more about this hearing and the work that Ken did. Find a link to it at fedgovtoday.com. Fed Gov Today continues in just a moment.
You know, there are platforms that allow for application development based on visual design tools and, pre-built components. So it's just much simpler the way that these low-code platforms come together from a development standpoint. You can take the pre-built components, you can pull them together in your development environment, and it's a much different way than how traditional programming languages are used for application development of old. And the result are several advantages that I think are noteworthy. First off, you can develop much quicker, and you can which drives much lower cost from a development standpoint. And then you can get to market much quicker. The key, I think, for the DoD, the other advantage I think about is really the creation of exceptional customer or soldier experiences that low-code, no-code platforms can provide. They allow for this very easy to follow process, self-guided path, I guess I'd say, through an application. And it's this super intuitive user interface that gets created based on the platforms that make them very easy to use.
Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, you can join Defense Innovators August 27th through 29th in Washington, D.C. for the NDIA Emerging Technologies for Defense Conference. Features a great lineup of top government leaders, classified briefings, and a new global defense hackathon. You can see the current lineup and register at ndiatechexpo.org. That's ndiatechexpo.org. Fed Gov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for watching. Have a great week. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the Fed Gov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.